Hi, and welcome into the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm excited to have you here this week. Now, before we get started, a few reminders that I want to give you some information on. And one is Grandparents Academy is hosting Grandparents Week again this year. This is a fantastic opportunity to join with other grandparents in an online celebration and educational conference that's focused just on grandparents and the needs and information that grandparents need so that they can have an awesome relationship with their adult children as well as their grandchildren. Now, I've got a link to sign up for this event that's in the show notes. So be sure to go to grandparentsacademy.com and be sure to go to the show notes for this event on my website, and you can check out and register for Grandparents Academy's Grandparents Week. Now, the other thing I want to remind you of is I've got my children's book, My Grandpa's Grandpa, and that's on sale at my website. And this is a great book for fathers and something that could be a really special Father's Day present. So be sure to check that out over at my website. That's cool-grandpa.us, and you'll be able to find that book easy. Place an order, and if you want me to sign it, just shoot me an email. Let me know. I'll be happy to sign that. Now, this week's guest is Kevin Lyles. Kevin is a nationally recognized lawyer, retired, and is currently a retirement guru. Kevin serves at the Rock Retirement Club by creating robust educational resources, hosting webinars, and sharing his wisdom about planning for retirement and having the best retirement possible. He's a certified retirement coach and specializes in assisting professionals and executives as they make their retirement transitions. He is absolutely great, and we're going to get into this information about how to pre-plan for retirement, how to get on the same page as your spouse when it comes to what retirement is going to look like, as well as how to plan for retirement where you are exercising and sharing your gifts and talents and strengths with your friends, family, and community. So you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Kevin. And without further ado, let's jump into it. Hi, Kevin. Welcome to the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm excited to have you on this conversation today.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Greg.
Now, what I'd love for you to do is help us get to know you a little bit and help us understand a little bit of your background, because I think this idea of a retirement coach is really interesting. So if you don't mind, let us know kind of where you grew up, a little bit of your life story and what's going on with you.
Sure. I grew up in Ohio. Went to school in Ohio. I got my undergraduate law degrees at Ohio State and stayed in the Columbus area for my career and was there for 30-some years while I was practicing law. And I retired a little early at 55. And so the retirement coaching come later. But let me back up. So after law school, I met my wife, who was also from Ohio. And we got married, 2 kids who both live in the Columbus area. So since I retired, we split our time between Florida and Ohio. I'm in Florida now, and our kids are in Ohio.
Oh, that's awesome. And, I don't know how much you're into all the football rivalry. I think it's almost a standard, but now that Harbaugh and Michigan are going through their change, you guys might have a good couple of years here.
Yeah, the Buckeyes aren't too sad about that, but he had a good run there for a while.
Oh, of course. And it's wild because I think people I meet that went to Ohio State and from Columbus just really love that area. There's something about that part of Ohio in general, in Columbus and in that area, that people just really seem to enjoy.
You know, it's great living in a town that has a big university. I'm going to say a big college town, but Ohio State's a university with all the professional schools as well. And there are several other good schools in the area. And it really is good to live there. I think it keeps you young. You know, you're around young people. College is an exciting time of life. And so I think it's good to live in a college town. When I'm coaching retirees, it's always one of the options I suggest. Have you thought about that? It'll keep you young.
Oh, sure. I love even going through my experience with grad school and undergrad is going to the football games when I was there and seeing the people that had graduated 20, 30 years ago that had friends and family and they were doing the tailgating, they were doing those things, but also seeing the grandparents with their grandkids going to those
Absolutely.
games as well and sharing that experience.
Yeah, at Ohio State, as like at a lot of big schools like that, we have probably 100,000 people who just go to the games to tailgate. They don't go in the stadium; they just sit outside and watch it on large screen TVs.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, and those are just great memories to have. I think some of those at a much smaller school, but I grew up in the DC area. I remember going even over to Annapolis to the Naval Academy and seeing the families going in there and walking around that campus and as historical as that is.
Yeah, college is such a transformative time of life. In many ways, I liken it to retirement. Retirement's a big transition as well. In college, you're going from your parents' home and the safety and comfort of that to your own independence. Retirement, you're leaving if you will, the safety and comfort of a career and going off on your own. So they're somewhat similar.
Oh, that's a great parallel for that. And what I'd love to do is ask you a little bit about what kind of law did you practice, and then how did you transition from being an active lawyer into becoming a retirement coach?
Sure. I was with the same law firm my entire career. So I got out of school and joined this firm, became a partner there, and worked there for years. It was an international law firm, so I got to travel a good bit, meet a lot of people around the world. I practiced corporate law. My specialty was in healthcare transactions and also data privacy and security, which has helped me some as I've retired to avoid some of the scams and things. You learn a little bit, but it was a great career. I really enjoyed it. But I decided at 55 to focus on some other things.
Oh, sure. And uh, what made you decide on becoming a retirement coach? Everything that you could do as far as going to being on boards and all sorts of different directions. Was there something driving you to help become a retirement coach?
Yeah, it's and I did continue with some board work and do that to this day actually. But what I first started, I first studied retirement planning, and I did that mainly for my own benefit. I was going to take over managing our own investments, and I was entering this new phase of life, and I thought I should learn about the financial side about it. My undergraduate degree was in business, and so I've always had an interest in that side of things. So I wanted to study retirement planning, and I got my CRPC designation, which is Chartered Retirement Planning Counselor. And that's the financial side of retirement. And I just did it primarily for my own good. I had joined this retirement club called the Rock Retirement Club, and I started teaching some in that and really enjoyed helping people. As I say, it's a challenging time of life. You go from the comfort of an employer to you're on your own. And so that you can really help people a lot at that stage of life. After about a year of that, though, once you sort of graduate from the financial side, you figure that all out. I realized a lot of people still have trouble in the transition into retirement. And by that, I mean a couple years before and several years after retirement. There's a lot of people that become dissatisfied with it. And a lot of people go back to work. And so I learned about retirement coaching. Frankly, I don't think I had ever heard of it. I'd heard of life coaching, I'd heard of financial coaching, but I never heard of retirement coaching. And I became familiar with it through the retirement club I was in and some coaches that I got to meet. And so I decided to get certified as a retirement coach because I thought, well, I can help other members in this retirement club out and learn a little bit myself. So I took the curriculum and started coaching, and I've really enjoyed it. It gives me a real purpose in my retirement to help others. It's something I wanted to do to give back, and it seems like a good way to do it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you too, what is your definition of retirement? Because I think sometimes people can think of things as it being very on off, right?
Yeah.
Because you're working or you're not working. But I think things have changed over time where I'd love to hear what your definition of retirement is.
Sure. I think retirement is a state of mind. I knew I was retiring from practicing law, giving up that profession, and didn't have any plans to become a retirement planner, retirement coach, didn't have any plans to ever have another job. And I still don't. What I'm doing now, I don't consider work at all. I enjoy it, but I still consider myself retired. I guess it's having the freedom to do what you want to do. So people ask me now, how do you decide what you're going to do each day? And it's just based on your own personal priorities. What's important to you? I try to make sure I give ample attention to each area of my life. And sometimes I have to confess, during my legal career, I didn't do that. I spent too much time on that probably and neglected some other important areas of my life.
Well, yeah, and that happens to us, I think, as fathers. And I've talked with people about some of the differences between being the father and the grandfather, where the father is very much heads down on the tactical day-to-day. How's my career going? What are we doing with the mortgage? What are we doing with the kids and schools and clubs? And you're focused in on that kind of the day-to-day stuff. And then as we get a little bit older and we become grandparents or grandparent age, we shift a little bit more into the strategic level, right?
Sure.
The viewing, and some of that has to be looking backwards and going, oh, you know what? Maybe I missed a couple of kids' recitals a few too many times, or maybe I did this. And it's a little bit of regret, but a little bit of learning, right? Because you can't come back and tell a 35-year-old you, like, hey, don't stress out about whatever at work. Go to the kids' recital, enjoy it. That's a lesson that everybody has to learn.
Yeah, and, I'd like to think I'm getting a little wiser as I age, but if it's not wisdom, at least I know I'm getting better perspective, and that's something, and it's important. And part of retirement coaching is talking about the grandparenting experience with the retirees, and your relationship with your grandchildren needs to be different from your relationship you had with your children. But in most ways, it's far, far better. So we can talk more about that as we get into this, but that's so important. And your own relationship with your children change as they've become adults and they become parents.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Before we get down that road a little bit, what I'd love for you to do is have us back up a little bit and tell us the difference between a retirement coach versus a wealth manager, because I think sometimes maybe those get confused a little bit.
Yes, and I'm going to add a couple more terms to your list. When I think of wealth managers, to me, that is an investment manager. They help you manage the assets that you have and help you with your investments. Then there's what's called a financial planner. Financial planners primarily help you to accumulate money. That's their goal. They do that by helping you to save, to invest, with spending, with taxes. They give a lot of advice. So that's sort of the financial planner. Then there is the retirement planner. And the retirement planner really helps you with, one of my friends who is one of the fathers of retirement planning. His name's Wade Pfau. He gives the analogy of the mountain climber. You climb up the mountain. That's how financial planners help you. When you go down the mountain, that's when retirement planners help you. And most accidents in mountain climbing are coming down the mountain, not going up. And so retirement planners help retirees manage some of the unique risks that you face in retirement. And there are 3 or 4 risks that retirees face that you really didn't face when you were working and saving money. Shall we go over those?
Yeah, I love for you to let us
Okay.
know.
Well, the one that everyone thinks of, the obvious one, is longevity risk. Are you going to outlive your money? And so that's the first thing a retirement planner does, is puts you on a path to where you won't outlive your own money. And it would be easy. It would just be a mathematical exercise if we knew when we were going to go, right? But since we don't, you have to conservatively plan for living a long life. There's no other sane way to do it. So that's one of the risks that retirement planners work on. Another one is inflation. And 3 years ago, no one was talking about inflation. We hadn't seen much inflation for 30 years or more. Well, now we've seen it, and people realize, oh, you mean my cost of living can go up? And especially these days when people are sometimes retiring younger, but certainly on average living longer in retirement, inflation over a 30 or 40-year retirement can really cause havoc with the budget. You may start out thinking you're going to spend $75,000 a year. Well, that becomes $200,000 by the time you're in your latter years of retirement. So that's another risk that retirement planners help retirees with. Then there's just the typical market returns. The market, we have market crashes every few years. On average, the market goes down 10% at least once every year or so. So you have those things to manage. And for retirees, there's what's called the sequence of returns risk, which means when you retire and you've got the most money saved, you haven't started spending it yet. If you have some really bad market returns the first few years of retirement, that can really eat into your portfolio. If that happens, then growth doesn't pull you back up. If you lose $500,000, you've lost 500,000. Well, you've now got 500,000. Gaining 50% doesn't get you back to $1 million. It only gets you back to 750. On top of that, you don't have the full 500,000 because you had to withdraw the money to live on that year. And so it's just a vicious cycle that retirees face. So that's a risk. Market returns and sequence of returns risk. And then finally, the last two are sort of intertwined. It's overspending in retirement. Some people just go crazy. They start buying those toys that they didn't buy while they were working. You pick up the new boat, the fancy sports car, maybe it's a cabin, whatever it might be. But then as you get older, health care, long-term care expenses start to really grow. And those things need to be managed. So all of those things, that's what a retirement planner does. And then you started by saying retirement coach. That's sort of the fourth one of these I'll define for you. The retirement coach is helping people with the non-financial issues that we face as we transition into retirement.
Okay, so as a retirement coach, what are some of the things that you help people with as they start to transition? So they've got, let's say, the money side taken care of, or they've got the right people helping them out with that. How are you helping them out as a retirement coach?
Sure. Well, one of them, it sounds financial, but it's not. It's having confidence in your financial plan, in your retirement plan. You're no longer getting a paycheck, and you've gotten a paycheck your whole adult life, and it's scary. And so a lot of people really freeze and have trouble spending money, even if they've saved enough. So that's one thing as a coach you help people with. But the other ones, the more typical ones that you hear about, are helping people with purpose and meaning. Our careers give us purpose. And a lot of us who've had meaningful careers that really were important to us, you miss that when you retire. Just feeling useful. You go to work, you do a good job, you get an attaboy, you get paychecks, so you're useful to someone. Well, in retirement, you don't get any of that feedback that you get at work. So just feeling useful. Another big one we talk about is the changing relationship with your spouse. Especially if both of you were working intense jobs, Now you both retire and you're together 24/7. That's a significant change in the relationship. The other part of that is, for most of your marriage, you probably had children. And so your own relationship with your spouse was mostly about parenting those kids. You spend about 70% of the time talking to your spouse about the kids. Well, that's now gone. The kids are adults. They're off on their own. Here you are, you're together. So it's that changing relationship with your spouse. A big one we talk about is health and wellness. Most people who retire are starting to feel it in the joints a little bit, so they start thinking more about their own mortality. And so how can they protect that? So health and wellness. Caregiving obligations is another issue that we talk a lot about. People start to need to help their parents. Maybe it's a brother or sister. Maybe it's their own spouse who becomes ill. So caregiving obligations. And then the fun one and a big one is grandparenting. And that's another one that we talk about, and how to be a good grandparent. And we look at it from both sides. It's not just being a great grandparent to the grandkids and helping them. It helps you in retirement in so many ways, being a good grandparent. It can give you that purpose and meaning that we talk about. And so that's an important part of it. It allows you to see the world in a new way through a child's eyes again. And that's so special as you're aging.
Oh, absolutely. A question I've got for you too around that grandparenting with retirement is, how do you work with people to prepare for some of the things that pop up as being a grandparent? And what I mean by that is that if you're following local trends, you're seeing some increase in the number of grandparents that are suddenly raising grandkids. There's, of course, health of the grandchildren. If heaven forbid they come down with some kind of illness, they do something else. And that can also be jarring for people that are in retirement, that go and buy the nice, retirement home on the Gulf Shores, and they're hanging back and life is good and here we are. And then you've got these hiccups. How do you help people adjust even to those things?
Yeah. And a big one that you didn't mention, but is probably the most common, is your own child is not able to take care of their children for whatever reason. It may be an illness, maybe a substance abuse issue, whatever it is, they're just not able to do it, at least for a period of time. In then you're not grandparenting. At that point, you are parenting, and you're a caregiver at that point. And so we do talk to retirees a lot about having the right mindset about that, because you can get resentful and angry in a hurry. Because, as you said, you planned on spending your time traveling and out on the boat or whatever it was, and now you're taking care of a 4-year-old every day. And that, if you don't have the right mindset about that, it can really ruin your retirement life and ruin your own mental attitude.
Oh yeah, because it's something that's totally unaccounted for. And when you're sitting down and you're starting to get into, I'm going to make up a number. Let's say you're 40s, and you're starting to work with that wealth manager, and you're starting to build up your 401s or your investments or whatever. You don't have in the back of your mind like, oh, by the way, in 15, 20 years, I'm going to have to suddenly, be a parent again.
That's right. You just got your youngest out of college, and here it is. Now you're starting all over again. You're right. It's a huge change in life. And, what I tell people is, if you can do it, what a gift to those grandchildren who otherwise don't have parents, or at least effective parents at that point. So if you can do that, and you can go into it with a good attitude, it can be a very rewarding time of life, obviously. As you mentioned earlier, you've got a new perspective. You've learned a few things in your years and through getting your kids grown up. And so hopefully it'll be a little easier the second time around, even if you don't have quite the energy perhaps that you had before.
Oh, sure. Something else I want to ask you about too, being a retirement coach, have you noticed or have you seen different trends between generations going into retirement and what those behaviors are. For example, the silent generation, who by now they're really in their late 70s, 80s. We've got boomers, and now I'm one of the older Gen X, because Gen X, I think, starts at 68. So we're still like early mid 50s, but we're heading into that retirement age group.
Yeah, there's been a big change. I mean, when you talk about the silent generation, the reality is they didn't have very long retirement lives. You know, you tended to work, and by the time you retired, you were worn out. Frankly, the way we got 65 as the age in the United States for Social Security was in Germany. I think it was von Bismarck had created a pension at 65 for people. He didn't think anyone would ever collect it. No one was going to live that long when it was created. And that's sort of how the silent generation's retirement was. Most people retired and quickly started on a downhill spiral. And so if you were retired 5 or 6 years, you were lucky. And so that's when, if you remember 10, 20, 30 years ago, every picture you would see of retirement had someone sitting where? On a park bench, right? Feeding the pigeons. That's what retirement was. It was just a time you were worn out. You just needed to rest and relax until you became old and infirm. Then the baby boomers, and I'm a baby boomer. I'm a young baby boomer. We started changing things and expected a lot more out of retirement. Didn't want to just sit on the park bench. We wanted to stay active and stay involved, stay relevant. And that's been a big change. Now, I'm not sure yet about the older Gen X's, what you guys are going to do, Greg, but my suspicion is because your generation has not been tied to one career. You certainly, for the most part, don't have defined benefit pensions like the silent generation had. You're always going to work in some capacity. You sort of learned about gig work and remote work, and I think the Gen X is going to work longer and probably not think of retirement as a huge event. For my generation, the baby boomers and before me, it was a big event in your life. You know, you'd get the proverbial golden watch, right, from your employer and have a retirement party. I'm not sure you're going to have a lot of that in the future. I think it'll change.
Oh yeah, I can definitely see that in terms of, I think, because I was in my professional career and coming up, of course, there's always been stories about Social Security and some of these things. But it seemed like it really was ramping up in the, let's say, late 80s, 90s, to early 2000s. Hey, Social Security's in trouble. It might not be here. And so there's a lot of us. I remember those coffee room conversations around like, you can't plan on having any of that for your retirement.
Yeah, it's a common discussion I have in the Rock Retirement Club with our members who are getting ready to retire in the next year or two. And I tell them, and they're not counting on any Social Security. And I say, you're being a little too conservative. People who are retiring now, you know, if you're 60 years old today and thinking of retiring in the next few years, you're going to have Social Security. You're going to get that. You're going to have Medicare. It will change some, but for the most part, it's probably not going to change a lot for you. It's going to change a lot, perhaps, for the 40-year-old. You know, whatever reforms we get and changes we get, they usually feather it in to where as you get up to about 60, they leave you alone and give you what they've promised you.
Oh, sure. And, you know, I think along those lines too, though, there's a little bit of empowerment in not planning on having that there, to your point. Because, okay, I'm 64, 65, I resigned from my corporate job. Now I'm doing, I don't know, a side hustle, some kind of a gig thing. Or it may be starting a whole new career, a whole new path. I've got a set of skills. I'm going to jump in. I'm going to start this new thing.
Yeah, if it causes people to save more or to build other income streams, that's great. Having that fear is useful. It's just when you get to actually putting pen to paper in a financial plan, you have to be realistic about what to expect. And who knows what, if you're 40 years old today, I don't know what Social Security will look like for you. If you're 60 today, I've got a pretty good idea what it's going to look like.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think those changes are pretty small. I mean, they can definitely be impacted, because if they move the age up a year or 2 years, then that changes your equations to both the financial side of things as well as lifestyle.
Yeah, and if you look at how they did it in the past, though, they would move it a month every year, or maybe 2 months a year. So if you were born in 1960, maybe your retirement age was 66. And then if you were born in 61, it was 66 and 2 months, and so on. So like I say, they feather it in so much that if you're up around 60, it's probably a safe bet that it's not going to change a whole lot for you.
Yeah, I think they do that on purpose, because that is a large voting block
Exactly.
in that age group. Then you talked a little bit about some of the life side part that you work with people on, with being a retirement coach. We'll hit on some of those, but what are some of the other aspects of that life side of retirement that you work with people on?
Yeah, one of the big ones is identity. That is finding an identity to replace your work identity. I'm actually writing a chapter now in a new book that's coming out. Retirement Coaches Association is putting out a book probably later this spring called Retirement Transitions. And so I'm writing a chapter on identity. And by identity, it's sort of, how do you think about yourself and how do you think the world perceives you? Well, when you're working, what's the first question you get when you meet someone? What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When you're working, that's an easy question to answer, right? But when you're retired, do you just say, well, I'm a retired whatever, I'm a retired plumber? That's not the best way to think of yourself in the past. So we work with people to develop an identity in retirement, primarily designed around whatever their primary purpose is going to be in retirement. And you don't have to just have one purpose. You may have several. You may have one with your family, one with your friends, one wherever you volunteer. But whatever your identities are, it needs to be comfortable to you, so that your own sense of self-worth is intact. And so that's a big one, identity. Another one is just mindset about retirement and about aging. It's a period of life when you start thinking about your own mortality, and you probably never did that before till maybe there was a tragedy in your life with a family member or something, and that made you think about it. But other than that, we don't think a lot about that. Well, when you retire, you have time to think about these things. So mindset, both your attitude on a daily basis. Are you grateful? Are you grateful for what you have, or are you upset about what you have? Do you feel like you haven't gotten your fair share? Those two people with those two mindsets will lead very different lives. It's so important to have a positive mindset, to have a grateful attitude. It's so important to have a positive attitude about aging. I didn't say put your head in the sand. You are going to get older. There are some things that you will do at 60 that you may not be able to do at 80, but you still can have a very fulfilling life. And so it's mindset. A lot of retirees get depressed. Depression is a very big problem in people in their 60s. Have you heard of the term gray divorce?
Yes.
It's the highest, it's the age in your early and mid 60s is when we see the highest percentage of divorces as a percentage of all marriages. And it's probably because some of those changes that we talked about before, which is you've spent maybe 15 minutes a day talking to your spouse, and now you're seeing each other all the time. The other big thing, though, and the one thing retirement coaches try to help with is, do you both have the same vision for your retirements? Often they're very different. We especially see it where one spouse maybe stayed home as a homemaker, the other spouse worked. Well, when the working spouse retires, it's so common for the homemaker to want to take off and go explore and do all those things that you haven't been able to do, whereas the worker sometimes just wants to sit down and take it easy for a while. So we really talk to people about planning, about figuring out what their common goals are. They don't have to be the same goals. What you try to do is figure out, okay, let's work together on our common goals, and let's leave room for each of us to have some independent goals. And it's okay to do things not together when you're retired. That's perfectly fine, but make it be part of a plan.
Oh, absolutely. I think my wife and I started, our kids got into high school, and then some friends got us into whitewater kayaking and some things here in the Northeast Georgia. And so we would kid with everybody that we're out there on the weekends kayaking and on these river trips and all day, kind of like figuring out we still like each other. Like, we don't have the kids around, the kids weren't really interested in it, but it was like the wife and I taking off, and it's like, do we really want to spend an entire weekend together?
Yeah. Well, and it's great that you have been able to do that at such a young age, Craig, because for a lot of people, their kids are leaving and going off on their own right at the time they're retiring. And so everything hits at once. And it's just a huge change. Another big thing that we deal with as retirement coaches, most people don't plan for when they retire. They're forced to retire. Usually it can be because your employer decides it for you. Their workforce reductions, businesses not doing well, you lose your job. But there are also health issues that arise, either you or your spouse, or perhaps caregiving obligations. You need to go take care of mom and dad, and they live 3 states away, and so you've got to be away a lot. So a lot of people are forced to retire before they plan to retire, and that's emotionally upsetting. There's a lot of bitterness, especially when companies lay off employees. One of the examples I remember is a lady who said, I was planning on retiring next year. My company sent out pink slips, got laid off. They gave me a year severance, but I'm so upset that they did that. You
Right.
want to say, well, why?
Right.
You get that last year paid. You were going to retire anyway, but it's the mindset part of it. She was so bitter, she couldn't see past that. Her anger at the company, and it was really holding her back to enjoy her life.
Mm. Now, along with the people that are getting ready to retire and the folks that are wanting to retirement, we've talked about some of the abrupt changes that happen. Do you guys also see a good level of success if people also enter into therapy? And some of that could be just coming to terms with the age and the mindset, because you're definitely helping with that. But I think sometimes too, having somebody else to talk to and work through maybe some things that came up in their 30s that they just haven't been able to push off. And suddenly it gets when they don't have anything to do, during the day.
Absolutely. It's my favorite part of being a retirement coach. It's helping people really thrive and succeed. And it usually happens when they finally realize what freedom they have now. They have freedom that they've never had in their life. You've got a freedom to decide where you want to live. And by where, I don't just mean what city, but I mean what kind of living. We talked about college towns. Well, there's rural, there's urban, there's international, there's living on a lake, there's living in the mountains, there's living at the ocean. You've got freedom to choose those kinds of things in retirement. You've got extreme time freedom that you've probably never had in your life. Your parents decided what you were going to do when you were a kid. Then you went to college and your college schedule decided, and then you got a job and you started working, and your employer told you what you were going to do with your time. Now you're retired. No one's telling you what you need to do with your time. It's a tremendous freedom. And some of the things you mentioned, maybe you want to start that business you always thought about. Maybe it's a hobby that you put away in your youth you want to get back to. I have a close friend who was a lawyer with me, practiced law in my firm, who's a musician. He had majored in music at college, which made him a bit of a unicorn in our law firm. You know, most people major in business or political science or something. He was a music major, but he had pretty much put it away, other than he volunteered on some music boards for symphony and some organizations in the community. But I think he had picked up playing a little bit as he got near retirement. Well, he's a French horn player, and he's now playing about 80 gigs a year in 2 or 3 ensembles. That's his life now. So it's those kinds of changes when people realize they have the freedom to do what they've always wanted to do. In some cases, Greg, it's when we get back to that identity question, you felt like you had to put on sort of a facade during your career and maybe repress certain aspects of your own personality that are important to you. You know, maybe it's a sense of humor, that you just love comedy and you love being a funny person. But, you know, if you were a mortician, it probably wasn't very good to take that to work with you. So in retirement, you have the freedom to be your authentic self. And what's really important to you, you can emphasize those things. So that's the positive aspects of retirement coaching that I love, is helping people figure out what is your ideal retirement life, and then how can we build that.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, I would want to ask you too, is this something where somebody should wait until they retire typically to get a retirement coach or start working? Or is it something maybe when you start to see that a couple of years ahead, start to have these conversations and maybe start working with somebody?
Yeah, well, I think with your spouse, with the most important people in your life, you ought to be talking about it at least 5 years out and maybe up to 10 years out, and sort of what are our expectations? First of all, when do we both each plan to retire? You're going to retire at the same time as your spouse, different times? Just start making sure, as we talk, that your vision for retirement are aligned. And to the extent they're not, figuring out how you're going to make that work. But for the average, and then beyond that, sort of the kind of retirement coaching issues, I think it's similar to financial planning for retirement. And that is, sometime 3 to 5 years away from retirement, you need to sit down on the financial side to figure out, have you saved enough to really be able to retire in 3 to 5 years? Are you going to be comfortable? Or are you going to need to work an extra year or two? That's important. On the non-financial side, it is, what am I going to do when I no longer have those 40 to 50 hours filled with my career? You know, how am I going to continue to have goals to grow as a person? You know, you don't stop growing when you turn 65 and retire. You've got hopefully another 30 or 40 years left. You want to continue to evolve as a person. And so you need to start thinking about how you're going to do that in your initial years of retirement.
Oh, I love that, because I can just assume that somebody that's been working 50, 60 hours a week, heavy regimented lifestyle, the idea of having freedom, you know, hey, Monday's going to come and you don't have anything on your diary, that can be overwhelming, because it's almost like too many choices.
Yeah, you know, most people, I always tell people, have that retirement honeymoon period. And that may be 3 months, it may be a year and a half, where you don't have to do anything. You know, you turn the alarm clock off, you do some of those chores around the house that you've been putting off, you take those trips that you've been looking forward to. But then after that honeymoon is over, you need some structure in your life. You've always had some structure. Now, you're not going to have as much as you did when you worked. You're not going to be stressed about it, but you need to have some structure. You need to have goals that you're working towards. And so that's really important, I think, for retirees.
Oh, that's awesome. Good information for us. Hey, Kevin, I've had you on for a little while. Is there anything about retirement coaching or retirement in general that I haven't asked you that we need to hit on?
I think we've covered a lot of it. It's to plan ahead. It's to think about what, you know, one big area that we didn't talk about. We talked about freedom of where you'll live. We talked about freedom of what you're going to do, who you're going to do it with. And it's a big issue for retirees is your social network really gets hit when you retire. Because for a lot of us, 80% of the people we hang out with, our friends, are from our work. And yeah, you're not going to cut those people off. But believe me, the ones that are still working, you're going to see them a whole lot less. And so the other thing that happens, unfortunately, is people die. Certainly your parents and all the people of your parents' generation who you knew, who were important to you as you grew up and were important in your life, they start passing away. You need to replace that. You need to continue to make friends, to engage in social activities. It's so important. And that's a big part of being a successful retiree. All the research that's been done said if we have, and for men, it's usually 2 to 3 important relationships, important friendships, people that we depend on, people that we confide in, those people live longer than people who don't have that. There's a lot of loneliness associated with retirement, and you want to avoid that at all costs. One of the things I've done, I've picked up the sport of pickleball. And it's one of the big things I do for my own health and wellness. It gives me a lot of exercise. But just as importantly, I come into contact with 20 or 30 friends, if you will, every day that I get to see. And we, and it's not, our relationships aren't confined to the pickleball courts. We get together after and do things. So there are a lot of things like that you need to think about and do. You can also meet a lot of people through volunteer activities. Get involved with a group of volunteers that you really enjoy, hopefully of different generations. One of our problems is if everyone you know is your age, well, when you're old, guess what? Everyone you know is old. So you need to expand your social network. And that's really important, I think, in retirement.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because I have had some conversations and some episodes specifically around the importance of the social connections, especially for men. I think in Great Britain, suicide amongst older men is the leading cause of death. Because of those connections and it's not those family connections that are lost, but it's also, to your point, work connections. It's family, it's friends, it's all of that. And if you don't have pickleball, if you don't have softball, if you don't have some of these other activities, and they don't always have to be sports, but if you don't have that, then, retirement and that time freedom that comes with it, you're not enjoying it as much as maybe you should or could.
Yeah. I think to my own career, probably 75% of the social activities my wife and I engaged in. Well, let me take that up. 90% either involved things associated with work or things associated with our kids' activities. Well, guess what? Those have all gone away. And so if you don't replace those, then you are going to get isolated and become lonely. You need to continue to get out there and do things. And there are a lot of tips that I give to retirees for doing that. There's a lot of ways to do it, but you just need to make an effort.
No, sure. And Kevin, what's the best way for people to connect with you, to see if maybe having you as a retirement coach is going to work for them, or the information, blogs, and things that you've done?
Yeah, I don't do a lot of individual coaching. I do some, but mostly I coach through the Rock Retirement Club. So you can check us out at rockretirementclub.com. It's a virtual community. We have somewhere over 1,400 members around the country, actually a few internationally as well. It's people nearing or in retirement, and it's a great community. And I do teaching through there and coaching through there.
Oh, that's awesome. And I'll be sure to put a link to that into the show notes. So I know people are out walking dogs and driving around and things like that. So we'll make it super easy that folks come to the website, check out the show notes, and I'll have a link to Rock Retirement. Kevin, it's been a blast having you on the Cool Grandpa podcast. I really have enjoyed this conversation with you, and I appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk with us.
Thanks, Greg. I enjoyed it.
I really did appreciate Kevin coming on and talking to us about retirement. It was great hearing his explanation about how we need to pre-plan for this event, that it's not just something that's going to happen and all of a sudden we're going to go buy bass boats and we're going to take off time and go fishing, but we really need to find a purpose. We also need to spend a lot of time pre-planning about what retirement's going to look like. In terms of being a grandparent, are you going to move closer to grandkids? Or are you going to move to a different location, one where maybe you can entertain all of the grandkids at once? If you need larger accommodations, are you going to downsize and look to travel? What are you planning to do? So I appreciated Kevin starting the old juices flowing and making me think in terms of what my own retirement in the future is going to look like. If you want to get a hold of Kevin, if you want to find out more about Rocky Retirement Club, I've got those links into the show notes. So you just need to go to cool-grandpa.us, look for this episode, and all those links will be in there. Also, too, I'm uploading a video of this conversation, excuse me, to YouTube. And so if you want to check it out and you want to watch the video, you can go to YouTube and look for the Cool Grandpa podcast, and we'll pop up on that feed. If you're over there, please remember to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. That would be a great way to support the program. So I know I've said a lot. I hope you have a great weekend coming up. And remember, until next time, to stay cool.